Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Scenic Route with me, Victoria Stewart, where we talk about the interesting roads that we may not have expected we would be taking in our lives when we start out as kids, or just kind of imagining how our careers would go, our lives would go, and how most of the time all of these journeys take us to an even better place than we could have ever imagined. And today I'm very excited to have John Petrozelli, the host of Done with Dating podcast. Today, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about his career and how it ended up at this podcast. I'm very curious about this. So, John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Victoria. How are you? Hi, audience.
Well.
Thanks very much for having me on. I'm excited
My
about
pleasure.
this.
Yeah. So I really resonate with your story just because I was a federal employee. You said in the military, then you were in federal law enforcement. So I'm just curious, like, where did you see yourself? Like, when you were going to school, maybe when you were in the military, where did you see your life going? When you were imagining the future, what did you see?
Sure. So, great question. When I was a young kid, I grew up, I was born in 1975, grew up as a child of the 80s, was a huge fan of Top Gun, but wanted to go in the Air Force. So, from about 8 years old, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And so, my entire life, everything I did in high school and everything was built towards becoming an Air Force pilot. And maybe not the drinking underage. That probably didn't help me with being an Air Force pilot. But I was honest.
Every military person I know.
But I was honest when I went for my security clearance. So I actually laugh when they ask me about that. But anyway, so I always wanted to be an Air Force pilot. That continued all the way until about junior year of college. So from the time I was 8 till that time, and at that point, I ended up meeting an intelligence officer at my basic training, and I really liked the idea of doing intelligence work for the military. It became more like less like Tom Cruise and Top Gun, and more like Jack Ryan. And so I was like, oh, this could be really cool. And of course, the intel officer sold it really well. When I say intel, I mean intelligence officer. And so I went back to my ROTC detachment, and at this point, I was an engineering major. And I went back and I said, I'm going to switch into history. I know I needed to make up 3 years in 2. So I did nights, not nights, so I did the semester breaks and the summer breaks, the winter breaks, every session I could to make up all the classes I needed to now graduate as a liberal arts major instead of an engineering major. But when I was in training, the recruiters told me, you don't need to be a pilot to be you don't need to be an engineer to be a pilot. You need to be an engineer to be a test pilot. And I was like, I don't want to be a test pilot. So I was already thinking about switching my career. And then when I wanted to do intelligence, I was like, I should do something that fits that. So I focused on, instead of the hard sciences, I focused on the Middle East. I focused on Central Asia, and my thesis was on the Middle East peace process. And I did a lot of work in the Model UN. I worked on the Central Asian states, represented Kyrgyzstan. And so I was really interested in the world and knowing as much about the world as I could. So then when I became an intelligence officer, I didn't even realize it, but I had been doing this, what I call intelligence preparation of the battle space. And that's been something that's helped me throughout my whole life, is this idea of before you make a decision, prep the area, prep what you think the decision entails, look at the risks, and then make the jump.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
interesting.
So that is the first part probably of your question. And then I could go through my career if you want me to talk about some of that.
Sure, but I do have a question for you just because my education background is engineering. And I'm like, how did you switch to like history? That's like a completely different like skill set for learning, right? Like, at least in my experience, the liberal arts is a lot of creativity, reading, sometimes memorization of things. And like engineering is not that, it's right application. So is this kind of like the preparing the battle space piece? Like, is the engineering like the practice of what you've learned? Or like, I'm just curious how you transitioned to the different style of learning so easily, it sounds like.
Well, because it was my passion, the
Yeah.
history part came easy for me. So
Okay.
transitioning from something that I didn't like doing,
Oh,
which
true.
my family is full of engineers and architects, and my engineering family members were like, just get through college. You don't need to remember any of this stuff. They'll teach you what they want to teach you in engineer when you're an engineer. And so I just struggled through calculus, I struggled through physics, chemistry, like differential equations, all these things because my goal was just to become an engineer. But I
Yeah.
didn't, my family kept telling me, "You're don't worry, you'll enjoy engineering even if you hate the college side of it." So,
That's so
um,
funny. So really you went to your real self, like to your
correct.
strengths. You moved out
Right.
of engineering into like where your strengths lie.
Right. But I did keep the total quality management aspect of Deming and iterative management.
Yeah.
I loved that with engineering, and my whole life I've tried to emulate that in terms of looking at a situation and constantly trying to evolve.
Yeah, that's so cool. That is so cool. So, you start out as an intelligence officer, still Air Force, yes?
Yes, so got
Okay.
commissioned as an Air Force intelligence officer in 1998. Started at Intel School, which was in Texas. So I'm a Massachusetts boy, really deep Massachusetts accent at the time. Started my basic training process down at Air and Space Basic in Montgomery, Alabama, driving my Massachusetts license plates vehicle through the South, landing in Alabama, where I realized I cannot have a Massachusetts accent. Nobody could understand me. So it's like I learned how to get rid of the Massachusetts accent and try to speak as a more of a world view person so
Hmm.
that anybody anywhere could listen to me. And so I went through intelligence officer training that was about 9 months, graduated, volunteered to go to South Korea. So I served 13 months in Korea, uh, in the the armistice there. So basically in a war zone, and was an intelligence officer there. That was an incredible career. I'm so glad I volunteered for that because I was very black and white when I went to South Korea. I
Hmm.
managed at the peak of that about 180 people. And by
Wow.
the time I left, I was completely in love with the gray area of life. So,
Mm.
before I would have been like, no, they committed this, they committed this violation. They needed to be punished. They needed to do this and that. And by the time I left, I was like, well, yeah, they committed this thing, but like, let's look at the other circumstances around it, and did they
Yeah,
do it in a bubble, or was there a reason for it? so
right.
so that
Extenuating circumstances.
yeah, so it fundamentally changed my life for the
Yeah.
better because I completely threw away the black and white book, and I lived in the gray area, which was really important for an intelligence officer too. So uh, went to Charleston Air Force Base as an intelligence officer, and I'm talking about this a lot because it really provided the foundation for my whole career,
Yeah.
and everything I've done. And at Charleston, I did a lot of combat mission planning. So we were C-17 aircraft were transport aircraft, but We had a mission that we supported special operations and SOCOM. So a lot of my job was combat mission planning. How do we infiltrate soldiers, um, and Marines or special operations into areas that are not necessarily controlled by us, and then do we extract them, or do they fight their way out, or how does that mission happen? And so I did a lot of that, and I won't go more into that for now. But the big gist out of that was I spent a lot of time doing combat mission planning, which involved intelligence preparation of the battle space, which was what I talked about, kind of getting as best a picture of you can of the environment that you're looking at, so that you can make the best decisions that you can in case you need to jump into a situation. So it's all assessment. It's all level of confidence and what can we do to get to, from point A to point B as safely as possible. And so that was a lot of my career there. And that I'm just gonna, if you want, I can start talking about the bureau a
Sure.
little bit.
Sure.
But I used that same mentality when I jumped out of the military and went into the FBI, where I became an intelligence analyst, which is not an agent. These are the non-law enforcement people in a law enforcement agency that are behind the scenes people. So I used to joke with like the show 24 that I wasn't Jack Bauer, I was Chloe, behind the scenes in the
Mm-hmm.
command post, um, gathering the intel and trying to figure out what the next lead was for Jack Bauer.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my job, and I did that. I worked all manners of crime in the bureau, terrorism, counterintelligence, cyber, and then all the crimes, and it was an incredible experience. In the bureau, I had 5 different career pivots in 17 years, and then I left the bureau, which was probably my biggest career pivot, moving into cybersecurity for a managed services provider as a director of cybersecurity.
Yeah. So I feel like it makes sense that you went into cybersecurity just because it's like a continuation of this, of your intelligence work. And I also see it as like, seems like you cultivated this big picture, the ability to see the big picture, look at the whole picture. And I feel like that's probably, and this is just me as a layperson, like I feel like cybersecurity, it's like you can't look at the details, you have to look at the big picture. From my experience when I managed a couple folks who were working in IA, and it was like, it's like you have to look at the details, but you also have to look at what's happening big picture. So to like, is that how you came into cybersecurity, or was it because it was interesting and different?
So, from a cybersecurity perspective, I hacked into my first computer in 1998
Oh, so
when I
you're a
was an
pro. You've
intelligence
been doing
officer.
this your
So,
whole life.
yeah, so cyber to me was always cool. I always liked
Yeah.
the idea of it. I loved playing video games. I loved taking apart my computer by
Hmm.
myself, re-imaging the hard drive and like putting stuff in there. So I was always somewhat of a cyber nerd like that. And all the way from 1990, probably three, when I got my first, computer of my own that was a Windows and on. So it was always a passion of mine, but it was
Hmm.
tangential.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like what I do now is a lot of strategic level looks, not just even at what's happening in the US, but what's happening overseas. So we were talking about, to just give you an example, we were talking about wiperware, which is a new advanced form of ransomware where they don't care about capturing the data anymore. They just want to destroy the hard drives. And we talked about the deployment of that after the initiation of the Iran conflict,
Hmm.
back in February. And
Yeah.
within 3 days of that, an Iranian affiliated group attacked a healthcare company and
Hmm.
used Office 365 to deploy this malware that wiped everybody's hard drives.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
we look at things from the high level, but with the idea that it's the details that make a difference, and the details um, are important because looking at the high level, you need to know how to be able to protect people across the gamut of these like detail related threats. And
Hmm.
so it's like the Intel officer was very similar, right? I wanted to, I wanted to fly a plane from, uh, let's say, for example, we were tasked with retrieving the EP3 crew that crash landed on Hainan Island, China in 2001. It was an international incident, and my team, my squadron was tasked with recovering the crew. and we had to plan for how do we get in there if it's hostile.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's a lot of details in that I can't get into, but
Yeah.
we were really focused on how do we get our crew in, recover their crew, and get out. And that was really, really complicated to do. But that had a strategic element with the relationship between the United States government and China. But then we were handling the very tactical work of, okay, if that strategic thing goes crazy, what are we doing on the tactical level to make sure that we get our crew out of there safely? So that's a lot of what I do is like take some of those details and then kind of bring it up to the high level to see, okay, how, if we have to do something at the strategic level, what are we doing tactically?
Yeah. And has it felt different that you're like not working in three-dimensional real world, but now in the cyber world? Does it feel different, or is it just have the environment changed, and the environment changes all over the world? So does it make a difference?
Yeah, well, so it still affects the real world. It still affects the 3D world, so it's still the same,
Hmm.
except we're in the past. Forgive me if I say kinetic, but we would conduct kinetic action, right, which is a missile going through someone's window and taking out a power station, let's say. Well, now with cyber, you can take out the power station. You don't
Yeah.
have to fire a missile. So it's the same type of thing. The target list kind of remains the same, but the way you
Interesting.
attack it is different.
Yeah. So the technology, right? The technology shifted, but what is happening has stayed the same
Right.
almost.
For the
Very
most part. I
interesting.
mean, obviously, as technology
Yeah.
gets, we weren't worried about Starlink satellites, back in 2004, although we
Yeah.
were using some satellites back then.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So now, does it feel good to talk about the podcast and like how you've taken this very interesting journey with lots of changes, growth, consistent kind of skill set all the way through? And now you're building a podcast that you want to be a dating platform.
Right.
How did this happen?
So, so that's a good question. Um, let me step back for a second
Yeah.
and say that I asked for my divorce in 2019. We finally went through the entire divorce process. We're done in 2021.
Hmm.
And before I started dating, I built myself a match profile.
Hmm.
I spent 2 months looking at male profiles and looking at female profiles while my profile was hidden
Hmm.
to determine what I needed to have in my male profile, in my own match profile, that would be um, appropriate, that would be popular, that would make sense. So I again went to
Did
this
an
very intel
assessment.
officer, intel prep of the battle space, right? And I looked at women's comments on there being like, enough pictures of you with a fish, or enough pictures of you guys with, half naked in the bathroom. Like, so I recognized that these were things that women did not want to see. And so I used that to build my profile, which I then got a lot of compliments on because I spent 2 months like trying to really curate my profile, make it look good, make it be something that someone, if they landed on it, would be like, okay, this guy, like he doesn't look like a psycho. He's he doesn't have inappropriate photos. Maybe the lighting is good, or the how he's taking the photos are good, or what he's doing in the photos are good, and then his narrative was good. So I did that intel prep of the battle space for my dating profiles, and that helped me. I mean, I did okay dating. Um, but I also at the same time, that level of interest that I put into that was also a very burnout type of thing because
Yeah.
I went on between 2023. I was in a long relationship from the end of 2019 once I was separated um, with my wife at the time, from then to 2023. So I was only with one person at that point.
Hmm.
So from 2023 on till about November of last year, I was really dating, and I was really in and out of relationships that could have been as short as like 3 weeks and as long as a year. So I went on a ton of first dates, and I got really burned out. And I
Yeah.
was like, this is awful. And I would talk to people because I was an intelligence officer like my whole time, my FBI career. I loved interviewing people. I would try
Yeah.
to, and people would share stuff with me that I would never expect them to share.
Hmm.
So over time, as I'm dating people, I'm still talking to women. I'm not asking about my profile, but I'm asking them, what is life like for you dating? And what is
Yeah.
this like dating? And what does this look like for you? And I would hear a lot of the same nightmare stories from women. And sometimes as like maybe on date 2 or date 3, I would ask them like, hey, what's your worst dating story? And I'll tell you mine, and we would
Hmm.
share those. And I was just like, mine, absolutely nothing pale in comparison to the women's stories that I would
Yeah.
hear. So I was like, wow. I so as I at some point in late October, I was just like, yeah, of 2025, I was
Hmm.
like, I'm done with this dating process. I'm tired of the apps. I'm just going to stop.
Yeah.
I stayed on one dating app that only had like 3 people a day
Hmm.
that I could see versus the whole carousel, swipe left, right thing. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to work on myself. I'm a father. I have 3 kids. I'm going to be the best dad I can be to them. I'm going to work on self improvement. I started learning a language. I started, doing more with my career stuff, professional development work at night. And I was like, I'm just going to stop putting the energy and the money that I'm putting into dating. Um, and I'm going to put that energy elsewhere, and I'll become a better version of myself. So then I ended up meeting someone off of the one app I stayed on,
Hmm.
and she's almost completely different than the the women that I had dated over the past like 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
And I think it was because I wasn't looking anymore, and we stumbled upon each other. She was in the same boat. But I started to think to myself, now that I was in this kind of happy relationship where I felt this is everything that I wanted in someone, but I was looking for it in the wrong way. It's
Ah.
like, how can I feel like the universe gave me something. How can I give back to the universe in a positive way? And um, and also, I didn't want to. I wanted to run a podcast, but I didn't want to do a cybersecurity podcast because that's my
Yeah.
day job. Like I do that all the time. It's full of conflict. It's full of stress and anxiety. I wanted to do something that was maybe a little more lighthearted and that people could maybe find more value in besides another cybersecurity podcast. So I was like, you know what? Let me create this dating podcast. And so I started the ideation of that in November of 25. Really started to dig through it in my time in 2026.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, in December and then January 2026, and I started it in February. And my girlfriend was like, "You need to tell me what your pillars are. What are your pillars going to be for this?"
Hmm.
And so my thoughts were matchmaking was my first pillar. Self improvement is the second pillar of what you can do to help when you're taking a break from the apps.
Right.
And then entertainment, because I have a lot of married friends. My dentist listens to my podcast and gives me feedback all the time. I have 3 kids, so I'm at the dentist a lot. And so he was like, "Hey, your first podcast, pretty good. This is what I would say differently, But a lot of people like listening to it as a way of just entertainment, where the married ones are like, oh, thank God I'm not out there. But I have a lot of experts like yourself on
Yeah.
who talk about other things that people can use when they may be doing that same break I had from dating, where they're just looking inward and helping themselves.
Yeah. So you want to like share a little bit of like, because you said you were doing dating the wrong way, or it felt like you had been moving into it like the wrong way. What do you see as like the right way, and how is this podcast helping people to like shift maybe their energy around dating, or like how do you see it working?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll give you a little bit of like the reason that I say that about me was, I was heavily into dating fitness professionals, bodybuilders, CrossFitters, powerlifters. Like those were the types of women I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would focus on that. I'd look at photos, I'd look at what they were doing in life, and then I would look at what they had in their profile. And if some women didn't have like strength training in there, which I think is really important for longevity, and I'm 50 now, so I want someone who's, can help me carry furniture around, if we're moving, or is functionally capable of carrying groceries, because strength training equates to health when people are older. But I so what I realized was, after meeting the woman that I'm with now, who is an incredibly gifted athlete, but is a 500-hour yoga instructor, completely different, completely different environment and world
Yeah.
and pace. I realized that what I was doing was I was um, too pigeonholed on what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And my current girlfriend, in her profile, had strength training, and we joked about it. She's like, "So if I didn't have strength training in there, you would have just passed?" And I was like, "Potentially, I might have."
Yeah.
So I was so pigeonholed, I completely almost missed the most important person that has been the most like well-rounded person that I've ever dated. So
Yeah.
I really, really dodged a bullet there. And so my thought is, going back to your question, how can I help other people to maybe listen to a person and not just look at profile pictures, not just look at what's written down, and maybe even just not look at like a 30-second video that they have, like an intro video on some of these social media pages. So my thought was, why don't I interview people? So the matchmaking part of this podcast is, I'm bringing on some guests that are interested in finding their love match. And I interview them using kind of the FBI and intel officer skills, try to draw from them what their passions are, what they really what they really hope to find in a partner, what they least want to find in a partner,
Mm-hmm.
and really try to give this person a 10 to 20 minute opportunity to give their elevator pitch to the world and have people hear about them. And um, then people can, once they listen to the podcast, go onto my website and then apply to date them,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little bit different. I've gone back and forth, like, should I just give their Instagram handle? But at that point, it's kind of like the Wild West. There's
Yeah.
no vetting at all there. So my thought was, if I created the website, people at least have to fill out, terms of service saying that they're not going to be using this for fraud. They're not going to be doing this for this. They're, they might be willing to get a background check, which I'm not doing background checks on there, but if they know that they're filling this out, at least there's a little bit like a little bit of a
Yeah.
level of vetting in there for the people that are coming on as my guests. And so people can apply to date my podcast guests who are looking for love. And I've figured out what I'm going to do is call those episodes matchmaking episodes.
Nice.
Right now they're called Date a Guest, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to change it to matchmaking for the titles. And so people will know, okay, this is either an expert that's coming on to talk about something, or it's going to be a matchmaking episode where this person talks about themselves. And um, what I found, one more thing I'll mention on this is, what I found is, through these interviews of these people who are looking for um, their right match,
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to pull on some strings that they may not have thought about talking about.
Yeah.
So I talked with one of my guests. I pulled her in the direction of crafts, and she started talking to me about the incredible work that she does with crafting. And you really pulled out, like, I was able to pull out her passion about that. And then we started talking about, her love of British humor and that kind of dry sense of humor. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, those are the types of
Yeah.
things that I'm hoping to be able to highlight for the guests on the podcast, so that when maybe someone's listening in their area, and is like, wow, I'd really love to meet this person, then they can apply on my website to meet them.
Yeah, it feels like such a novel idea and totally makes sense. It's like instead of getting these little snippets, you start to get to see the person as who they really are.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, maybe on, our best behavior, we're getting recorded, but still, like when you pulled out like her love of crafts, I'm sure it's like she probably lit up and got excited and
Yes.
everything. Like she became like more herself.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what's not more attractive than that to like, and like some of us, like we struggle at the start to open up to strangers. And this is a way, because you're in a more long form conversation, you kind of get past the awkwardness and it's low stress, right? Like just having a conversation. The people are listening, the potential partners and
Right.
people to date.
Yeah. And it's completely voluntary and it's completely free. So I'm looking for those types of guests that are willing to try something a little bit unique. And over time, I think that the more traction I get for the podcast, the more other people will come on and be like, well, my friend did it, they can do that. Like I was talking to someone, I interviewed someone last night who was on to talk about a live event in Boston that they do. But he connected me with two people who were interested in coming on the matchmaking episodes. So now
Awesome.
I've got a couple more to interview for that. So I think that it's going to grow over time. It just
Mm-hmm.
started. It's only 2 months old, but
Yeah.
I see a lot of opportunity here in this, and it would just be maybe another tool in someone's toolbox to be able to use to find the person that they want to, if they're
Yeah.
willing to take that risk.
Yeah. No, it's so cool. And it's just like you said, it's like we all have the thing that really resonates with us. There's a lot of us who have podcasts and then we start our podcast, but it's like, I love the idea. I shared it when I was getting my haircut and she was like, that is so cool. I don't think I've ever heard of like a podcast being around, yes, dating, but not like the active part of getting people together. And I was like, right? It's brilliant.
Yeah, well, and I'm also now ideating the idea of actually doing a podcast like live, where I go to
Mm-hmm.
a restaurant or a bar and then, announce that we're going to do this and then have an audience for the podcastee, and maybe they'll meet someone in the audience when
Yeah.
the podcast is over. So I'm starting to work on how to do that. I bought the equipment for it. Of course, being the paranoid tester I am, I'm going to test the equipment like 10 times before I try to do it live. But I'm planning to do that maybe in July or August. So
Yeah.
at least in the Boston area, I might roll this out and see how it goes.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, because it'll be interesting to see too. Is like because I know there's lots of my favorite podcasts. They'll do live shows, and it makes it so interesting, right? Because people get to ask questions, and it's like feels a little bit more not always vibrant, but if like I could imagine that for this concept for your podcast, that having people coming in, multiple people, maybe even on a show, and then who knows if you let the audience ask questions, they might ask some really brilliant questions of like how to pull that like cool piece of like what really makes that person an individual and special, like out so that everybody gets to see it and experience it rather than like answering the questions on the apps. And like we get overwhelmed, at least I do, of like, oh, I have to fill in all these things and then I have to do this and it needs to sound good and everything else. Not all of us will like spend 2 months checking out the other profiles to be like, what works, what doesn't work. I'm like,
Yeah,
I just need to get it done.
most normal people would not do that. I'm not a weird. I am a weirdo, but I'm not a stalker. So
Hey,
I
we're
am
all
going to
special
post.
weirdos. If,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
we weren't, it
exactly.
would be a very boring world.
That's right. I am going to post at some point. I have to do a podcast episode of how to build a dating profile for a male. I'm going to use
Yeah.
my Match profile because again, it was really popular. I got a lot of women who liked it. A lot of women weren't even necessarily interested in me, or found me from like another state and were like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm not interested, but I just wanted to tell you, like, I loved your profile. So I
Profile.
was like, well, thank you. Like, that was really nice, so,
Yeah.
um, so I'm gonna do one episode on that, in hopes that I can try to help maybe people who are just getting into it, or maybe post divorce, like scared to
Yeah.
death of dealing with this, like an exer like me who had never dealt with online dating before marriage, to get used to it and get comfortable with it,
Yeah.
and to try to be better with it. Like, my goal is also to try to make it a better environment for the women who are looking for men, because it's such a crappy environment, and you can get some real jerks who have either stuff on their profile, or once you make the connection, start sending inappropriate stuff. And one thing I will say is there's other podcasts, or not podcasts, but there's live events out
Mm-hmm.
there. And some of them I watch. I love some of them, but mine is going to be also suitable for work, because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to be talking about like the podcast unless it's a specific episode where I had an expert on to talk about sex. Like, this podcast, especially in the data guest, the matchmaking episodes, is not talking about sex at all, other than sexuality, because I've
Right.
had a gay male on looking for a partner, but not like nothing inappropriate that you
Yeah.
couldn't
More
listen to at work.
preference.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. No, that's so cool. I will say there was I was like, oh, you should do an episode where the friends sell, like, or, promote their friends, because I think you had the one lady on, right, where she does the
Yes.
live events where it's like the friends come to hype up their friends who
Right.
are dating. I was like, that would be
Yeah.
fun.
So that's Pitch a Friend. Yeah, there's a
Yes.
Pitch a Friend in a bunch of different cities, and one of them is Pitch a Friend in Boston.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I had Rebecca on, and she's a matchmaker, and she also hosts Pitch a Friend. So the other thing I've learned in this, in creating the podcast, is I've learned so much from other people,
Yeah.
and I've made some incredible relationships with other people. And I'm like, wow, I've actually become part of a completely different community of
Yeah.
people I would never have met had I not started the podcast. And so now I'm talking about potentially running my podcast at, not necessarily, I haven't talked to Rebecca about Pitch a Friend, but at some other events, where I can run the podcast as just kind of a maybe side quest for people who are
Yeah.
just kind of people watching, or there to meet someone, but not necessarily where to go. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to try to run that at some live events as well.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Their possibilities are endless, right?
Right.
And now you're like in this matchmaking community of the Boston area. Like, I didn't know it was like so, just from listening to the podcast episodes, it's so rich. People are doing
Yes.
so many cool things. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. And it's neat too, because it's like bringing people back together when we
Right.
like all dissipated a little bit
Right.
with COVID and everything else. And now it's kind of like, okay, how do we bring everybody back together again, which is
Yes.
awesome.
And in that prepping of the battle space mode, I'm prepping the battle space by letting people who are not already dating know what's available to them, whether they want to do Pitch a Friend, or whether they want to do a matchmaker, or whether they want to do a dating coach who can help them,
Mm-hmm.
set themselves up for success, or whether they want to have, someone who can help them if maybe they're not even worried about dating, right?
Yeah.
But they ran across my podcast and now listen to your episode, which talks about women and prepping to make that decision to like move to another phase of their life.
Yeah.
So financially, so, although a lot of it is about dating, it's not all about dating, because sometimes when someone is taking a break from dating apps, they can pivot to something that they want to focus on, because they now have the time and the space to do that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I think also like when you have a bunch of different people on, I feel like the underlying message from most of us is very similar, right? Like it's in reinforcing boundaries. It's like being clear on what you actually are looking for. What do you actually want? Not what versus everybody else is telling you want. So it's just interesting that you're bringing all these different people from these different perspectives to reinforce this kind of message of like, hey, be true to yourself, which is powerful.
Right. Yeah, and I've learned a lot from yourself, from other people who have been on, and it's really changed in some cases my understanding of who I am as a person as well. So I keep doing it, and I keep inviting new people on. I'm like, oh, you do something like this? Like I don't know anything about that. Let's bring you
Yeah.
on, and talk about it because they it impacts my life somehow once I actually think about it.
Amazing. So, is there anything you wish I had asked you that you wanted to talk about?
Um, One thing I was gonna mention when we talked about like the kind of the super highway and the shifts, um, it's really important to me. It's like near and dear to my heart. Is when I did leave the military, I left. I jumped out. It's the one time in my life that I didn't prep the battle
Mm,
space, and I took off. And I was mad. I was an intelligence officer. We had been really working hard on the Afghanistan war. I never set foot in Afghanistan, but I did a ton of combat mission planning for it.
yeah.
I wrote our combat search and rescue special instructions for crews who would have crashed in Afghanistan or how to evade the enemy and stuff.
Hmm.
So I was really heavily involved in that. And I was very passionate about the war on terror post 9/11. When our government started to shift to Iraq, not only did we start to see this idea of like something that had, it's probably not controversial now, but an entity that had nothing to do with 9/11
Yeah.
being targeted by our government. So there was the intelligence officer in me who saw the underlying intelligence that, you know, the vice president was using to say like we should be going at them because there's WMDs and this is
Right.
what they're doing. And I knew that was crap. It was a crap explanation back then because of my access. But then what really hurt was I started to see our assets move from the fighting the Bin Laden war, hunting Bin Laden,
Hmm.
going after the Taliban and Al
Yeah.
Qaeda in Afghanistan, and moving those assets that we were using for the war on terror now going to Iraq. And the the special operations community had this whole grand plan of okay, once Afghanistan is somewhat settled, we're going to start hitting the terrorist groups in other parts of the world where they are, so that our goal was some we never want a terrorist to go to bed at night not thinking that we can reach out and get them.
Yeah.
Right? That was special operations command as I understood it. It's just my view of
Yeah.
it. But anyway, so what I wanted to leave your listeners with is I jumped out of the military and I was not prepared for what post combat mission planning intensity
Yeah.
life was like outside the military. And I did it quickly. So I was out
Hmm.
within 6 months of doing all that really intense work. I was out and I had I was like really treading water or sinking for
Hmm.
about a year and a half until I got
Yeah.
back into the bureau, back into intelligence. And so I would just offer it up that if there are people who are um, looking to make a transition to the private sector from the military and they would like to have somebody to help them, for free, everything I do on this stuff is free.
Hmm.
But if they wanted someone to just maybe be a sounding board for them,
Hmm.
it's really near and dear to my heart to try to help military members who are trying to leave to do that intel prep of the battle space as
Yeah.
best I can help them. And there's better programs out there for transitioning that I didn't have back in 2002. But still, I would just wanted to offer that up.
Yeah. It's a very difficult transition, right? Your life becomes completely different. Like, even
Yeah,
it's not like you were deployed and coming back, and that's what like can be terribly difficult. But it's like even being in that cadence, in like that mission that really speaks to you, to then just be like, that community can disappear.
right. And two things with that. Number one, for those who were deployed, the closest thing I had to I was deployed a lot, but the closest thing I would have to like almost like the real churn of like combat operations was the manhunt for the marathon bombing. I was working 20-hour days looking for the Sarnaya brothers before we even know who they were.
Yeah.
And to go from that type of environment to a normal desk job a week and a half later was completely surreal. And that's what a lot of soldiers and Marines and people who talk about, who are in the global war on terror, like talk about their experiences of going from a really crazy, chaotic, fast-paced environment where you have all stuff coming at you nonstop, and then all of a sudden, complete peace, where you might be sitting on a park bench and being like, "What the hell am I doing here?" My mind is still churning like crazy, you know. So, so anyway, that's one thing when we talk about shifts. That if your listeners have people who are leaving the military and would like to just reach out to just talk to someone out there, I can help with that idea of, trying to transition from that really crazy fast-paced environment to that like slower environment, and trying to help them with the idea of like getting therapy to help them transition and think about what their job opportunities are and things like that.
Beautiful. How do you want people to connect with you if they are interested in talking about this?
So you can go to my my Instagram. You can just search, I think, "Done with Dating" on Instagram. I have a link tree, and I'll send that to you as well. And then any of the apps related to Spodcast, Apple, just if you search "Done with Dating," the podcast will be there.
Okay, beautiful. And we'll include all that in the show notes as well. And is there anything besides this very important idea of supporting the military members when they are transitioning out or transitioning from one thing to the other, from like one cadence to the one level of stress to something that feels like nothing is happening? Is there anything else that you're like super excited about or want to point people towards?
Yeah. So on the lighter note, I need podcast guests. So if you are a self-improvement expert and you want to come on and talk about something related to self-improvement, or you want to come on a matchmaking episode and be a guest, one thing that I have promised these people is that every time we do a recording, they get a view of it before it goes out. So, there won't be any surprises with what I'm doing. This is all free. I'm not making money off of anybody. At some point, I would hope to maybe like get some advertising revenue or something with sponsors, but like the process is free, the website is free, all that's free. So the only thing I need is people who are willing to take the risk and come on, who are looking for matchmaking. And then also, it doesn't need to be Boston as well, like just Boston. I had someone from Washington, D.C., and someone from Kansas City also on as matchmaking episodes.
Awesome. And reach out to you the same way on Instagram for if they want to come on as a guest, or on
so they can go to the website. They can go to the website and apply to be a guest. So there's 2 links on my website: be a guest or date a guest.
Okay.
So they could go on and apply there, or they can reach out to me through the Instagram. If that's easier for them, that's fine.
Okay, beautiful. Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, John, for being here. Thanks everybody for listening. And please go listen to John's podcast. I think I was smiling and giggling the entire first 6 episodes at least that I listened to. I thought they were so fun. And so the entertainment value is 100% there, especially if you've have strange dating experiences like I think all of us have had. So, and if you enjoy this show, please like and subscribe and rate. And we will talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.